Lost in a storm-swept jungle, a wounded woman finds an unlikely protector, a scarred wolf thought long dead. Their fragile bond becomes her lifeline as predator and prey blur into something sacred. Before we follow Alara deeper into the jungle, if you believe in fragile bonds, second chances, and the wildness that still lingers in the world, consider subscribing and supporting us. The jungle didn't roar that night. It breathed, low and heavy, its damp lungs exhaling steam through the treetops as the first fat raindrop struck the canopy. Alara stood still on the narrow game trail, head tilted, listening. The rest of her team had marched ahead, their voices weaving in and out like bright threads in the green. For a heartbeat, she felt alone already. The air was warm and thick, clinging to her skin like wet cloth. She gripped the leather strap of her satchel tighter, fingers brushing the edge of her field journal. Somewhere far to the east, thunder cracked with a bone-deep shudder. The storm was rolling in faster than expected. "Hey, Alara, you're falling behind again." Malik's voice floated back through the trees, tinged with irritation. She shook herself and pushed forward, boots sinking slightly into the mud. "Sorry," she called, though her voice was too soft to carry. The jungle had its own rhythm, a music she'd grown to love. Bird calls spiraled through the shadows above, and insects were like tiny engines in the undergrowth. Even now, with the storm looming and the air heavy with warning, she couldn't help scanning the edges of the trail for signs of life. A rustle of leaves here, a flash of movement there, and then she saw it, a paw print, pressed deep into the wet soil. The shape was unmistakable, large, splayed toes, claws faintly scoring the earth. Not a jaguar, not a wild dog, a wolf. Her breath caught. "Impossible," she whispered. The locals had spoken of wolves once roaming these jungles, their numbers dwindling over generations until they became stories told around low fires. There were rumors of one, an ancient male scarred and solitary, that had evaded hunters for years before vanishing entirely. Some said it had died. Others said the jungle had swallowed it whole. She knelt, fingers hovering over the print but not daring to touch it. The edges were sharp. "Fresh. Alara." This time, Malik's voice was sharper, the faint edge of panic in it. She rose quickly, tugging her rain jacket tighter as the trees began to shiver with the first gust of wind. Coming! But the paw print stayed in her mind like an ember refusing to die. The team regrouped in a small clearing to redistribute equipment before the storm hit in full. Tents sagged half-assembled on the ground. Papers flapped like desperate birds in the wind. Malik barked orders while Aisha fought with the comms unit, her brow furrowed. "This isn't good," Malik muttered as Alara approached. His dark eyes flicked skyward. "If the river swells, we'll be cut off from base camp for days." "We should hunker down now," Alara offered gently. "The canopy's thick here and—" "No time," he interrupted. "We have to move to higher ground before nightfall." Aisha shot Alara an apologetic look before bending back over the radio. The first sheets of rain fell as they set out again, drumming against the leaves in a deafening roar. Visibility dropped to mere feet. Shadows coiled tighter around the group as the storm swallowed the light. It happened fast. A snapped branch beneath her foot, a sharp cry as the ground gave way. Her body tumbled into nothingness, the world spinning green, black, green again, until she slammed against the earth. Pain flared in her ankle like fire, and her breath left her in a single violent rush. "Alara," Malik's voice, faint above the rain. The word caught in her throat. She looked up. The slope she'd fallen down rose steep and slick, a wall of mud and roots. Water cascaded down in narrow streams, turning the ground beneath her into a slurry. "Alara, hold on. We'll get a rope." She tried to answer, but winced as pain shot up her leg. The rain was louder here, hammering against the broad leaves overhead. A cold shiver worked its way down her spine as she fumbled for a radio. Static. "Alara, can you hear me?" Malik's voice was clearer now, but the edge of fear in it sent her stomach twisting. "Yes," she rasped. I think my ankle's twisted." "Stay there. Don't move. We're coming." The connection hissed and died. She sat still for a moment, clutching the radio like a lifeline. The wind keened through the trees, bending them like reeds. Her heart thudded wildly against her ribs. Minutes passed. "Ilara!" A faint shout above. "I'm here." Her voice cracked from strain. "Here." No answer. Only the steady roar of rain and the distant rumble of thunder rolling closer. She hugged her knees to her chest, trying to conserve warmth as the cold began to seep in. Her mind replayed Malik's voice over and over like a mantra. "We're coming. Stay there." But then came the movement. A soft crack of twig behind her. Her head jerked up, every muscle tensing. The jungle sounds had changed. No birds, no insects, only the rush of water and that slow, deliberate crunch of weight on wet leaves. "Ilara?" she called, her voice trembling. Silence. She fumbled for her flashlight, but it sputtered weakly before dying completely. Her breath quickened. Something was there. A shape moved just beyond the edge of vision. Low to the ground, deliberate. Her mind raced through possibilities. Jaguar, wild dog, even a hungry boar. But no, the movement was too fluid, too quiet. And then she saw them. Two golden eyes, glowing faintly in the dim light. Her breath caught, her throat closing tight. The shape shifted forward, and moonlight broke through the storm clouds just long enough to paint its outline in silver. A wolf. Scarred muzzle, fur darkened by rain, massive shoulders tense yet oddly calm. Her heart slammed against her ribs, but she couldn't move, not from fear, not from pain. The wolf stopped a few paces away, head slightly lowered, ears flicking forward as though weighing her presence. Its gaze locked onto hers, unblinking. She whispered before she could stop herself. "You're real." It tilted its head at the sound, water dripping from its whiskers. The air between them thrummed like a live wire. A low growl rumbled in its chest. Not hostile, more like a warning to whatever else might be listening in the jungle's depths. Ilara's fingers tightened around her satchel. If the wolf meant her harm, she had no chance of escape. But something in the stillness, in the steady way it watched her, kept her rooted. A flash of movement behind her made her flinch. The wolf's growl deepened. Its eyes darted past her shoulder, muscles bunching as if ready to strike. The jungle seemed to hold its breath. Rain fell harder now, a curtain of sound between her and the world above. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, slowly, the wolf took a single step forward, and Ilara, trembling but calm in a way she couldn't explain, whispered into the darkness, "Don't leave me here." The wolf sat, its golden eyes unblinking, as if in answer. The storm raged on, but Ilara felt, for the first time since falling, like she might survive the night. The rain had softened to a cold drizzle by morning, leaving the jungle dripping and shivering in muted shades of green. Ilara stirred from a shallow, fitful sleep, her body stiff and cold from the long hours curled against a tree's thick roots. The pain in her ankle had settled into a dull throb, and her clothes clung damp and heavy to her skin. For a long moment, she lay still, unsure if the night's events had been a fever dream. Then she saw him. The wolf was there still, just beyond arm's reach, his massive frame half shrouded in mist. He sat motionless, tail curled around his forepaws, and watched her with eyes like amber caught in flame. Ilara's throat went dry. The memory of those golden eyes in the storm's chaos came rushing back. She shifted slightly, trying to ease the ache in her leg, and the wolf's ears flicked forward. His gaze didn't waver. "You stayed," she murmured, her voice hoarse from disuse. The wolf did not move, but something in the tension of his body seemed to ease, if only by a thread. A faint growl echoed from the underbrush. Ilara tensed, her breath catching. The sound wasn't from him. The wolf's head snapped toward the noise, his lips curling in a silent snarl. A rustle of leaves, the snap of a twig, and then quiet again. She had the unsettling sense that he wasn't watching her so much as guarding her. Ilara looked down at her pack. It had slid several feet away in the night. Reaching for it sent sharp pain streaking up her side, but she bit back a cry and dragged it close. The waterlogged fabric sagged heavily in her grip. Her radio was still dead. Of course it was. She rubbed her eyes with the heel of her palm, trying to think through the fog in her mind. Malik, and the others might be searching for her even now. She had to try to move toward higher ground, but every instinct screamed against leaving the relative safety of this hollow. The wolf rose suddenly. His body was lean and corded with muscle under his mottled gray coat. The scars along his flanks stark against his fur. He padded a few steps toward the trees, then paused, glancing back at her. Her pulse quickened. "Are you leading me?" she whispered. The wolf's ears twitched. He waited. Illyra's fingers dug into the wet earth as she struggled upright, the effort leaving her dizzy. Her ankle protested every movement, but she forced weight onto it anyway. If she stayed here, she would starve, or worse, be found by whatever had stalked her during the night. She limped forward. The wolf kept a deliberate pace, never more than a few strides ahead. The jungle seemed different now. In the daylight, its shadows were less menacing but no less alive. Vines coiled like snakes along tree trunks. Birds shrieked warnings overhead, and insects swarmed in glittering clouds. Illyra's stomach cramped painfully. She hadn't eaten in over a day, and her water supply was nearly gone. She pulled her jacket tighter and pressed on, watching the wolf's steady movements. Every so often he would stop, ears flicking, as though listening to something she could not hear. Hours passed in a blur of aching muscles and shallow breaths. Illyra stumbled often, catching herself against low branches or the gnarled roots that clawed up from the ground. Each time she faltered, the wolf paused until she righted herself again. When her strength finally gave out, she sank onto a fallen log, gasping. Her fingers shook as she reached for her field journal and pencil. She flipped to a blank page and began to sketch him. At first, her strokes were clumsy and weak, but soon the lines sharpened. The curve of his shoulders, the proud lift of his head, the long scar trailing from ear to jaw. She shaded his eyes carefully, trying to capture that molten glow that had watched her all night. "Guardian or ghost?" she whispered to the page. The wolf padded closer then, silent as smoke. He sniffed the air near her face before turning back to scan the undergrowth. Her heart ached with a strange mix of fear and gratitude. He left her briefly, disappearing into the ferns. Panic bloomed in her chest at his absence. She called out softly, her voice breaking, "Please don't leave me." Minutes later, he returned, jaws clamped around the limp body of a rabbit. He dropped it near her feet and backed away a few paces, watching. Illyra stared at the offering. She had never eaten wild game before, never imagined she could, but her body felt hollowed out, the hunger gnawing so fiercely that her fingers trembled as she reached for her knife. She whispered a quiet apology to the creature before beginning the grisly work of cleaning it. The wolf watched with calm, unflinching eyes. By dusk, she had coaxed a small fire to life using the driest leaves she could find. The heat was meager, but enough to warm her numb fingers and roast the rabbit meat on a sharpened stick. The smell alone nearly undid her. As she ate, the wolf sat across from her, still and silent. He didn't beg or approach, only blinked slowly as if satisfied she was no longer on the brink of collapse. The flickering light cast his scars in sharp relief. Illyra wondered how many fights he had survived, how many storms he had weathered alone. She wanted to speak to him, to fill the heavy silence, but her voice felt too small for this wild place. Instead, she set her journal carefully in her lap and began to write. Day 2. Alive because of him. Don't know why he stays. Maybe I'm too weak to be prey yet. Maybe he's lonely. Her eyelids grew heavy, the fire's warmth lulling her into a fragile sense of safety. The wolf shifted closer now, lying down just outside the ring of firelight. She watched him through a haze of exhaustion. "Why are you here?" she murmured. The wolf's ears twitched, but he made no sound. Illyra wanted to keep her eyes open, to watch him as he kept watch over her. But sleep came like a tide, dragging her under despite her fight against it. In her dreams, she heard his low growl rumble through the jungle, steady and sure. When she woke in the dark hours before dawn, he was still there, golden eyes glowing faintly through the drifting smoke of the dying fire. And for the first time since she'd fallen, she no longer felt alone. Dawn broke slowly, its pale light bleeding through the tangle of trees. The jungle seemed to exhale after the long storm, mist curling low over the sodden ground like ghostly fingers. Ilara woke with her cheek pressed against damp moss and her body stiff with cold. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was, until she felt the weight of the silence around her. She shifted, her muscles protesting, and then she saw him again. The wolf lay just beyond the dying embers of her fire. His massive body was curled tight, nose tucked beneath a foreleg, but even in sleep his ears twitched at the faintest sound. Steam curled from his coat where the early light touched him, as though he were more spirit than flesh. Her breath caught. She wanted to move closer, to trace the scars that mapped his body, to prove to herself that he wasn't some fevered invention of her fear and loneliness. But the sharp ache in her ankles stopped her. When she tried to shift her weight, pain flared so bright it left her dizzy. The wolf stirred. His head lifted slowly, golden eyes fixing on her. He watched as she gritted her teeth, clutching a branch for balance, and tried to drag herself upright. "I need to go," she whispered, though her voice was barely more than a rasp. The wolf stood, shaking out his fur. For a moment, they only looked at each other. His expression was impossible to read, but there was no malice in his stillness, only a quiet, measured watchfulness. She took one step, then another. The ground was slick, every root and stone threatening to send her tumbling again. Her body felt lighter than it should, as though something deep inside her had burned away in the night. Perhaps it was fear. Or perhaps it was that part of her that had always believed she didn't belong in wild places, that her love for them was something foolish and fragile. But she was still here. The wolf padded ahead without sound, his movements graceful despite the faint limp in his gait. They moved together through a green world that seemed unchanged by time. Vines hung thick and heavy. Flowers bloomed in impossible colors. Small creatures darted through the undergrowth, unseen but not unheard. Hours blurred. The sun climbed high and pressed its heat into her skin until sweat soaked her clothes. Hunger gnawed at her again, though she tried to ignore it. Her water was nearly gone. At one point she stumbled hard against a root and fell to her knees. The wolf stopped instantly. He turned back, ears flattening for a moment as he studied her. "It's fine," she said aloud, though her voice cracked. "I can keep going." She forced herself up, leaning heavily on the branch she carried as a makeshift staff. The wolf remained still for another beat, and then, without warning, he moved closer. Ilara froze as he approached. Her fingers gripped the staff tighter. But instead of circling her like a predator might, he brushed past her and stood just at her side, close enough that she could feel the heat of his body. For a moment she felt absurdly comforted. Together they walked. When the sun dipped and the shadows stretched long across the forest floor, she realized she wouldn't make it much farther. Her body trembled with exhaustion, every step a battle. Fever prickled at her skin. The air felt too thick to breathe. "Just a little farther," she whispered to herself. But her legs betrayed her, and she crumpled onto the earth. The wolf stopped again. He stood there motionless, as though weighing something. "Go," she murmured weakly. "You don't have to stay." He didn't move. Night fell slow and heavy. The sounds of the jungle shifted again. Soft whistles, rustles, the occasional scream of some distant creature hunting in the dark. Ilara lay curled in the hollow of a tree's roots, shivering despite the heat of the day still lingering in the ground. Her thoughts drifted in broken fragments. A memory of her mother's voice. "The wild doesn't love anyone. Ilara, it only takes." The echo of Malik's voice on the radio. "Stay where you are. Don't move. We're coming." But they hadn't come yet. The wolf lay down a few feet away, watching the shadows with sharp, restless eyes. His ears twitched at every sound. When a jagged scream rang out in the distance, he rumbled a low growl deep in his chest. The sound vibrated to ground like thunder. Ilara felt tears sting her eyes. She hated the sound of her own weakness, the small sob that escaped her. "I don't want to die out here," she whispered. The wolf's head turned, his golden eyes catching the faint moonlight. Her fingers reached out slowly, shaking. She didn't expect him to come closer, but after a long, tense moment, he did. His scarred muzzle brushed against her trembling hand. The fur was coarse and wet from the day's heat, but warm beneath her fingers. "Thank you," she murmured, though her voice was barely audible. She drifted into sleep with her hand still resting against his neck. By morning, she burned with fever. Her dreams came in fractured images, the wolf's eyes glowing in the dark, the sound of water rushing somewhere close, her mother's voice whispering over and over, "The wild doesn't love anyone. The wild doesn't love anyone." But in the dreams, she answered back, "Maybe it doesn't." But he stayed. When she woke, her lips cracked and throat raw. She felt movement beside her. The wolf had pressed his body close to hers in the night. She could feel his steady breathing, his warmth seeping into her bones. She whispered his name for the first time. Ash! The word felt right somehow, like it had always belonged to him. His ears flicked, but he didn't move away. She closed her eyes again, clutching her field journal tight to her chest. With the last of her strength, she scrawled words she wasn't sure anyone would ever read. "If I don't make it, remember, the old wolf was real. He didn't let me go alone." The air shifted before the sound reached her. It was faint at first, a low thrum against the silence, growing louder with each passing moment until it vibrated to the ground beneath her palms. Elara opened her eyes slowly. The jungle canopy swayed overhead, fracturing the light into shifting patterns. Her body felt distant and heavy, as though it belonged to the earth now, roots winding through her veins. Then she heard it, the mechanical hum of rotor blades slicing the air. She blinked hard, disbelieving. The wolf was already on his feet, hackles slightly raised, ears swiveling toward the sound. His body held no fear, only a tense readiness as he stared into the sky. Elara tried to call out, but her voice cracked in her throat. She managed only a hoarse whisper. "Here. I'm here." The noise grew louder. Leaves trembled as the wind whipped through the clearing, loose debris spiraling upward in miniature storms. She pushed herself onto her elbows, vision swimming. Figures in bright orange jackets emerged between the trees, their voices sharp and hurried. "Elara Rayner," one of them called. She opened her mouth, but no words came. "This is search and rescue. Hold on, we're coming." The wolf growled low, his stance shifting closer to her as the men approached. One of them raised a hand to signal, but stopped abruptly when his eyes caught the massive animal at her side. "Wolf, there's a wolf!" he shouted. Two others froze, their hands tightening on the tranquilizer rifles slung over their shoulders. "No, don't!" Her voice cracked, desperate now. "Don't hurt him." The wolf's golden gaze flicked between her and the strangers. "Easy," one rescuer murmured. "It might be sick. Stay back." But Elara reached out weakly, her fingers brushing his coarse fur. "It's okay," she whispered. "Go." The wolf's ears twitched. For one long moment, time stretched in. The air was thick with the smell of earth and oil, the roar of the chopper overhead pressing down on them like a weight. Then the wolf stepped back. He met her eyes, steady, unblinking, before turning silently and slipping into the green. "Elara, stay with us." Hands gripped her arms, lifting her gently as her legs buckled. A mask was pressed over her mouth, cool air rushing into her lungs. "Wolf," she murmured against the plastic. "Don't hurt the wolf." "No, wolves here," someone muttered. "She's delirious." But she knew. Even as her vision dimmed and her body surrendered to exhaustion, she could feel the lingering heat of his presence like an ember pressed to her skin. When she woke again, it was in a sterile white room with sunlight spilling across the floor in long golden bars. The smell of antiseptic filled her nose. Machines beeped steadily beside her. "Elara." Malik's voice was soft but edged with relief. He sat slumped in a chair, eyes rimmed red with fatigue. "You made it," he said. Her lips cracked into a faint smile. "Told you I'd keep up." He huffed a weak laugh, rubbing a hand over his face. Later, they tried to explain it all away. Her injuries, the time she spent alone, her insistence that an old wolf had kept her alive. "Wolves haven't been seen there for years," one colleague said gently. "Must have been fever dreams," another added. Elara only smiled faintly and said nothing. Months passed before she returned. The jungle greeted her like an old friend, heavy with heat and alive with whispers. This time she came alone, her ankles still stiff, but strong enough to carry her. She hiked slowly to the place where they had found her. It looked the same. The earth smelled rich and damp. The air hummed with unseen life. She knelt in the soft soil and traced her fingers over the ground. A faint depression marked the earth, the unmistakable shape of a paw print. Her throat tightened. "I kept my promise," she whispered. "I came back." A breeze stirred the leaves overhead. For a moment, she thought she heard it, a low, distant howl threading through the trees. She stood and turned her face toward the sound, a small smile curling her lips. The jungle had not forgotten her, and neither had he. If stories like these stir something quiet in you, if you believe in fragile bonds, second chances, and the wildness that still lingers in the world, consider subscribing and supporting us. Your support helps us bring more tender, cinematic journeys like this one to life. Stay with us. The story isn't over yet.